it's easy to get lost. And even recently, I've had that feeling of, I don't understand why this is happening. How do I fix this? Why aren't you there for me? And that's natural. That's human behavior. So, but again, just like trying to figure out how to be successful is just never give up. Maybe I'm going down the wrong path. Maybe I'm working with the wrong people. Maybe I'm doing things that aren't right because of my association with certain people. And I have to find ways to fulfill that compromise that is my promise, my personal promise to God in what is intended for me to accomplish.
Welcome back to the Quiet Knowing podcast. Today we're joined by the owner of Full Credit Media. He's also a director, producer, and my dad, Stevie Fernandez. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
So there's a question that we like to ask all of our guests first, and that is, what is the quiet knowing to you?
Just what you feel about yourself, what you think you are capable of and what you want to be, and that should evolve continuously.
Can you tell us a little bit about your spiritual background?
I was born and raised in Texas City, Texas, which is very south of Texas and near the Texas Gulf Coast. And being Hispanic, my family was very Catholic. I think each and every one of us was Catholic throughout my childhood. And most of my friends were I think my closest friends were Catholic, and they weren't Hispanic. It's just the way our community was. And although I had, Methodist friends and Baptist friends, but it wasn't something that I remember ever really talking about to my friends. It just was, we didn't like, as an adult and wherever you live, people will say, where do you go to church? Or what is your, and oh, you should come to my church. And I don't remember that ever being a thing back then. And then there were things that changed as life. And I think it's kind of like anything where there's a generation that everybody is kind of sticking to tradition and what we know. And then somehow or another, they get introduced along the line, I get introduced to something, and then that becomes the next thing. And on my dad's side of the family, eventually she was, I think, the fourth or fifth oldest. My dad had 8 siblings, and there were 8 of them. So she became Jehovah's Witness, her and her husband. And so I didn't really learn anything about that. We just sort of like, yeah, Jehovah's Witness, and then eventually another one of my aunts became Jehovah's Witness, and then my youngest uncle. And because they were the youngest ones, that all kind of became Jehovah's Witness, which made me think now when I look back on it, it was like what people do when they reach a certain age. They start to search out and seek out for other ideas of faith or whatever, and then they eventually turned my grandmother into a Jehovah's Witness because she wanted to be, because nobody else in the family said, hey, go to church with me, hey, do this. Although we were a very tight family, I think too because they were her babies and she wanted to do what they wanted to do. And so that was kind of, and then growing up Catholic, I would go to church, and since the 5th grade, I had this big crush on this one girl that she was Catholic. And if we go to church and she sat in front of me or behind me, I knew I'd get to touch her hand because
Right.
You would do, this sign of peace to each other, and you'd shake each other's hand or sometimes hug. And it was like, oh, come on, hurry up, get to that. And so that was, and then later on, I guess I just enjoy being Catholic because I know when to sit, stand and kneel, and don't have a question about it. And I enjoy, so you see the church evolve through time. And I remember as a kid, they still had Latin in church. They would still do the readings in Latin. And it was funny for us because at that time we also had this father, or I think, was he a father or Monsignor? Anyway, he was Greek and he had a really thick Greek accent. And at the time there was...
Can you do it?
I don't... something like that, you know. And then he'd be talking in Latin. And at that time, there was a popular TV show because he was also had a shaved head, and where there's a detective called Kojak. So all us kids called him Father Kojak, and I don't know, not to his face, but you know, he'd get to read Greek or Latin or whatever, and not Latin, you know, and so it was interesting. It was different, and I always liked the funnier fathers. But and then when I got into college, you know, I even high school, I think because you know, you'd have sleepovers with friends, and Sundays they would go to church, and I think my closest friend, they were Methodists, and I liked what their pastor had to say because it was still pretty traditional in the Catholic Church that they do. In Catholic Church, there's a point where they do a main reading, and then the father comes up and does a homily, which is basically, and then in the Catholic Church, every Catholic church does the same reading on Sunday. It's not somebody at church or the father or Monsignor decided, I want to talk about this because this is going on, like you see in some non-doms and stuff. And but at this Methodist church, this pastor talked about something, and I can't remember exactly what it was. I just remember it sticking in my head. And he did it in comparison of cars, which I was really into cars then and loved cars. And he talked about how different people were like cars, or, you know, and faith was like cars and stuff. And I found that to be really interesting. And it would be years before I found a father that really kind of spoke that way. I think when we lived in the Dallas area, there was a younger father that he talked that way, and he was funny, and we kind of became friends because we were friends with, Nichols' mom was friends with a woman there who was really sweet, and they had a lot in common, and they were close friends with that father. I think the husband had gone to school with him or something, and so we all kind of bonded then. And there was a time when I was younger that I thought I wanted to be a father, that I really wanted to be involved in the church. And I was probably 13 or 14, and I felt a calling, but I wanted to be a dad more than I wanted to be a father. So that's what kind of drove me past. And then in college, I would go to church with some girl I would like or something, you know, and learn more about some other, but never was it ever like what I felt when we first moved to Tulsa. Because there was one time in the Dallas area that I was playing golf with a guy, and who was a friend of one of my friends. They went to church together, and he asked me this was the first time I think I ever remember having that question asked, where do you go to church? And I said, well, I'm Catholic. And his rebuttal, or his response was, yeah, I used to be Catholic too, and then I got saved. And I was like, what are you talking about? You know, I feel pretty saved. I'm a pretty decent guy. And he said that, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That was the first time I felt a little offended by, well, it wasn't exactly the first time. There was another time when this family moved to our neighborhood and I was in college, but it was where we kind of ended up growing up through high school. And they had a daughter, and we became friends, but she was Baptist, and she wanted to find a church to go to, and I only knew of the one church in town. It was this big circle thing, and I said, well, let's go up there and find out. She wanted to go to church. I said, let's go find out when, you know, church is. And so we did, and there was an older gentleman walking around and putting up a sign or something, and she didn't want to go because she was shy. So I went and trying to impress her, and I asked the guy, so what time is Mass? He said, Mass? We don't have Mass here, son. We have service. And I was like, what the heck? I'm just trying to help my friend here. And why be so snooty? Just this, I don't know. But it was just nothing that, and because it was a relatively small town that I grew up in, 40,000 people, I guess it's not real small, but it's small enough that the Catholic church school would have a dance for teenagers, and we all went to that no matter what denomination, and we had just a really great time, and it was just part of the community. I didn't think of it like, it was one church or another.
So you grew up in a Catholic community, all your family, or most of your family was Catholic. And so having that sort of upbringing, naturally, you're going to gravitate towards the Catholic Church. But was there a time when, you mentioned some members of your friends or family were trying different religions out or whatever, but you've stuck in the Catholic Church. So was there a point where you felt like this is where I want to be, and you really felt alignment with that?
I guess for me, I've never felt like, because there's two answers to that, really. I've never felt like I was interested in anything else, but I also have never felt like the Catholic faith is everything. So, so that to say that would mean that I'm not like those people who say, "Oh, well, I was Catholic, then I got saved." I'm like, "Oh, you're back. That's great. You love that. That's wonderful." It's no different than, to me, almost, as saying that I couldn't be a lawyer or a doctor because I have to read too much, or I don't want to stick my hand in anyone's mouth, or it's like those to me are like, you are part of a faith because it's ingrained into you some way or another. Or you were, maybe that guy I was playing golf with as a Catholic, maybe he was a crazy kid who got drunk and did all kinds of stuff, and he probably met somebody, probably his wife, who was of a different faith and said, if you do this, you're going to feel better. And he did, because he was surrounded by people who made him feel better. And had that have been the other way around, maybe it would have been, and I think that a lot of people pass judgment on different faiths, especially the Catholic faith, because they see it from outside as being very regimented and being very strict and all these things. And I think that some of it is, but not all of it. And for me, I like that. I like knowing what's kind of expected to me of me. Not that I can live up to all of it, because I'm not, the Almighty, but because it's there, and I also know that I am worthy and can earn, forgiveness for anything that I do or say or think. And so I believe that we all have little miracles in our life, and you decide whether there's going to be the thing or not. And, one for me was when I was a kid. I think I was 12 maybe, or 11. And we moved from one city to another, and we moved to the city that was the one that was, we were rivals, and I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody, and I played baseball, which I love and loved, and I came up to bat in an exhibition game after a Little League parade, and the place was full with people from every team and people that I went to school with and went to church with in this new city. And I smacked this home run that not only went over the fence, it went halfway through the parking lot. And so then everybody thought I was like the home run kid and wanted to be my friend, and I led my team in home runs that year. And the more, as an athlete, the more that you exceed, the more people want to just be around you. And because I was a pretty happy-go-lucky guy anyway, I ended up winning like best sportsmanship award at our big banquet. And so athletics was also kind of important to me. And I think that when I look back on that, and my vision of faith and spirituality, that was God kind of giving me a nudge, and it becomes a little emotional for me. Sorry, but because there's a lot of times like that it just, like when Nick's brother was born, they told us we couldn't have kids because we weren't compatible in that way. That the doctors just said that her stuff was compatible with my stuff, and it was just not going to work. And then we were scheduled to do artificial insemination, and then she got pregnant, and and then we were able to make our little Stevie, and it was, to me, that was a miracle. It was because anytime people tell you you can't, and then you do it, sometimes it's you, but sometimes it's just feels like magic, I guess, and you have to know that that's a miracle.
It feels so different having this kind of conversation with you, not because I haven't heard any, know this information about you already, but just because I'm used to throwing jabs at you and us joking around a lot and stuff.
Yeah, and it's good. I mean, I think it's like when your stepmom and I, Deanne, do our podcast called Being Grandparents, I learned a lot about her that I didn't know just because we're having different kind of a conversation.
Yeah.
And, it's just like even you two meeting, you met online. And you think about that, that's kind of a miracle because there's all these people jumping online, randomly putting things together, and then you guys became friends pretty easily, but not really got into a relationship. And then finding that you have that, whatever it is, the chemistry or the aura or whatever you want to call it, is a miracle, and
Absolutely.
and they happen all the time. And you have to, there's different times in my life where face struggles and I start to pray about it. And I don't really always like to pray for myself because I like to pray for you guys, and I like to pray for other people who I feel really need help because I've always felt like I was strong enough to get through most anything. But when I really pray, things come in a way that said, "Oh my God, I thought this was not going to happen," and it's doesn't always come the way I want it to, and I don't in the form that I need it to, but it comes, and you have to accept that as being a guide to something that and people do. You could pray and say, that's not the way I wanted it, and walk away from it and not, completely frustrated and go on and do. But I choose to see it as a miracle to me in the help that I asked for. And I have to form that into a way to make it work.
Can you tell us a little bit about what guided you to own your own company?
I've always thought I wanted to have my own company because my grandpa had a company, and he had a construction company that primarily did foundation work for buildings mainly. I mean, he had started by doing foundations for homes or driveways and things like that, but then it grew into, buildings and shopping centers, and grew to where he had probably at least 100 people working for him. And my grandfather I never knew very well. He was very serious man all the time, seemed like, that I knew as a kid. And he would come in late and wake up early every morning. I'd see him out there telling everybody, because they officed at their home. They had a home in like a suburb of Houston where they owned a few acres, so there was plenty of room for them to store, their equipment and things. And they even had a few lots where some of their employees lived, that they had mobile homes there. And he and he didn't speak much English, and he wasn't born in Mexico or anything, just so you know, nothing. But he was he was just a leader of these men, and many of them, probably half of them, weren't legal aliens, but were trying to be. And I saw that in that what I saw was that there were all these men, the ones that were from Mexico. They would live in those trailers, and there'd be 4 or 5 of them in a trailer, and they would send money home. They weren't coming here just to, you know, to take or hurt or do anything, take jobs from someone, because most of those jobs nobody wanted anyway. And but they were trying to take care of their families, and not their immediate family, but their uncles and their aunts and their grandmas. And when he died, I was mad at him. And because also that every member of our family worked there at one time or another, and it helped our families help make their families. And when he died, I was mad at him because I never really had a conversation with him. Not like my other grandpa who spoke broken English and he'd take us to the grocery store or do things, you know, buy us water guns or, you know, pay us to mow his yard and just all these other things, but joke with us. And he'd always call us monkeys and little monkeys and stuff. But when my grandfather died, he was fairly young. I can't remember exactly. I want to say it was probably in his 60s. But there were more people at his funeral than any funeral I'd ever been to. And his brother, who looked just like him, came over and talked to me, and he spoke English. And I felt like my grandpa was talking to me. And so many other people came and talked to me and told me how he had helped them get jobs when they couldn't, and how he had helped them build families. And these weren't, again, they're not jobs that they were really hard jobs where you work summers in Houston where it's 100 degrees and you're out laying cement and doing really heavy work. And but they were grateful to him. And I thought about that because, like, you know, someone who becomes a governor or a president, their families have to sacrifice too, so they can do the bigger things in life that have to be done. And so I always had that on my mind, that I wanted to help people that way, that I wanted to make my dreams come true, but I also wanted to help others do it too. And so I've always been in a management position almost since I was in my early 20s. You know, I'd walk into a radio station, and then I'd be working as just a DJ, and then before long, management noticed how I made sure everything was good and right, and helped others, and they said, "Hey, you should be this," and then I'd be the program director and the general manager and all those kinds of things. And in doing that, I realized the pressure that comes from working for bigger companies is that they want you to keep making money. You know, no matter, even if you're making a lot of money, they want you to make even more money. And having my own business meant that I know I need to make money, but I can stop, you know, and I can say this is enough, or, you know, my real goal was to try to get it to where we're creating good, entertaining content that everyone can share and enjoy, and that as the creators, we could work maybe in a 4-day week so we can spend 3 days with our family and doing things that are also important, but it's hard to get there.
How can media be used for healing, truth-telling, or reconnection rather than division?
There was a time when media was supposed to be, and I talked to friends of mine who were in the news and had been in the news longer than I even had my career. And providing news for people was supposed to be giving them the facts, It's almost like what court you're supposed to be. You're presenting the facts, and then the 12 jury members make the decision. And we as people were supposed to be able to make the decision ourselves by listening to the news and the information provided. But now it unfortunately has changed where it seems like they're trying to point you in directions that they want you to think. And to find the information takes more of an effort of finding pieces from everything that's dealt out there.
Yeah.
And
they're always doing, who is they? We keep hearing about they.
yeah, you don't want to mention any names.
Right.
But, so I think that what we try to do with the media, and it's so heart-wrenching at times, is that when we make one of our films, I try to put in beliefs of believing in other people, beliefs in believing, it's funny because one of our movies, it's probably my favorite movie that we've done, is called When Will Jesus Return? And it's supposed to be a comedy, and it's supposed to be a modern day spin on an old movie from the late 70s called Oh God. And that movie stars John Denver and George Burns plays God. And when you watch that movie, God comes and calls on John Denver to help him make people believe in him again. And you think that's the late 70s. And then here we are in 2026 with people trying to do the same thing, so in the movie, God knows the answer, but he wants the other character to find out for himself, because if he can figure it out, then he can share that with other people like him. But if God just told him that, he's not going to do it, and people aren't going to believe him because he's going to say, well, God told me to tell you this. But when he finally feels and sees the miracle for himself, then he's able to convince people that God is real. And it's funny because we talk about when we have the film out there, we try to get it into places where people can give us their little reviews or critiques, and they just say things that are like sometimes so mean, or I don't understand why you're not seeing that this is a different way to maybe look and see that, because you can read in the Bible that it says that God and Jesus are beside us all the time. But what if they really are, is what this movie was about. And how would you react to that? And what would you do? And one of them, it says, well, Jesus should be all knowing, and says, you should be able to just tell. Well, that's not the point. The point is believing. And I have this feeling that one of the reasons that faith and belief in Christ is kind of dying out is because the fact that, in the Bible it says he's going to come again, that he's going to return. And it's been over 2,000 years, and where is he? And people get tired of waiting, especially in modern times when we can just get on our phones and chat GPT something and know something right away. Whereas in my day, had to go to the library, had to go through the Dewey Decimal System and go look for certain books, and they might be checked out, so I had to wait till they come back in. And, answers today happen instantly. And when where is Jesus? Why hasn't he come back? But who's to say he hasn't? Maybe he's here every day in the form of somebody or another. And, and we don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to say that. And there are people who come back and say they are, but nobody believes that. And what would it take today for somebody to really believe that someone's Jesus, because
yeah.
there's so much that you could do with special effects
Right.
or anything.
What would it take for you?
For me?
Yeah.
I think there would be a feeling.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
I would just
definitely.
know.
Yeah. It's like when you're around anyone else who's, very spiritually developed, you can feel that.
The like loving presence.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like my other grandpa. I think it was like on an Easter. We had gone back to the Houston area where my family's from, and the kids, Nick and everybody was little, and we went to go visit my dad and brother and other family there for Easter. And because I don't think my mom was living there at the time, but well, no, she had passed away. And my grandfather was the last person we went to go say goodbye to. And he told me that he had this dream that my mom and my grandma had come to the screen door and told him it was time. And they walked away. And I said, okay, Papa, whatever you say, we loved seeing you. Can't wait to see you again. And by the time we drove home, which is about an 8-hour drive, I had a call from my brother and my dad that he had passed away in his sleep. And so it wasn't completely unexpected because of what he said and the feeling that he left me with. So I was sad because I knew I was going to miss him, but I wasn't like caught off guard about it because I had that feeling.
So have you ever had a spiritual experience that changed your worldview?
I don't know necessarily in my worldview, but it just made me feel like I had a different understanding about it. Now, this is going to be kind of a crazy story. I'll say this.
Disclaimer.
Yeah. When my parents were struggling with their marriage, I made a challenge or because I felt like the devil was taking over them and was trying them, tempting them and pushing, because to me, they had what I thought was a great marriage. Yeah, they fought, but they made up. They made each other laugh. They were like really wonderful dancers. Recently, we were talking to my dad and asking him about his memories with my mom, and he said that how people would always say how graceful they were on the dance floor together and how beautiful they looked when they were dancing, that he remembered that. And so I always thought that was kind of what a marriage was supposed to be. You're going to have disagreements, you're going to have fights, but then they had really serious marital problems and they were ready to break up. And I told the devil, I shouted out that, come fight me, come try to take me, because I felt that I was stronger spiritually than them, and leave them alone. And, it's really not something you should do. I'm just going to say that out, because I felt like I had a really great life, but then challenges started to enter in my world. And part of that was just growing up probably, but it just didn't feel like it. And I even, to the point that not long, I just felt like after Nick's mom and I divorced, there just seemed like it'd be a series of, I just can't get past this. I can't get a footing that's putting me in the direction of being successful, or what I felt was success. And it's not having millions of dollars. It's more of just being able to comfortably pay my bills, doing what I enjoy doing, and taking care of my family. And that I looked up, okay, how do you break a curse, because I thought maybe my mother-in-law put a curse on me, or his mom, or maybe it was the devil thing. And and then there was a thing where you got in a bathtub and you put Epsom salt or something, and you said this chant a few times, and then things started to change. Things started.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad you did that.
Started to,
I was about to invite you over for Reiki.
And some of it is just how you change your feeling or your aura or your direction, and if that's what you need to do it,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you should do it.
Yeah.
I'm not
Well-
giving out my recipe though. When my mom died, I took that pretty hard because growing up, she was always like, I could do no wrong. You know, nothing I did was ever wrong. And she was always, you know, come on, baby, or mijo, or which is, you know, like my little man in Spanish, and my son. And she was always proud of me, you know, but I think she kind of slipped into a depression at some point. But we didn't know it then because nobody was depressed. You were just bummed out or had a bad day or something. But she would go to work, come home, get in bed and watch TV or talk to her sisters on the phone. And that kind of became her routine. But I think because she was kind of lost and didn't know what she wanted at that point in her life. And, but then when she left my dad and married another guy, she went off with him. You know, they moved off because he had a job in, another place. And then she moved to Indianapolis, and we weren't close anymore because she was doing whatever he wanted to do, it felt like. And even when she died, when she was dying, we had deeper conversations about those things because she, for one, she asked, well, why do you always do stuff with your dad and your stepmom and don't do stuff with us? I said, well, because they pay for it, for one, you know, and they make it easy for us to want to go do something and have fun. And when I'm around you and your husband, he wouldn't let the kids do anything. He wouldn't let them play outside because they'd step in his flower beds, or, you know, all they would do was go over and watch TV. And there was one time when he couldn't go because of work or something to come home. And so Mom came home with us, and that was like the best time we ever had. And she was so loose. She was my mom again. And everybody in the family said the same thing because even when they would come home, he would get tired of being around the family after a couple hours, and they'd go back to the hotel, and they would never stay with us. And so when she died, it was really hard for me, and we went back to that childhood home that I said that we lived in, and it was empty. It had been foreclosed on, and all the walls were bare, and all the floor was pulled up because I guess they were trying to, you know, in the process of renovating it to sell it, the bank was. And it was just like out of a movie when you feel the coldness of emptiness. And I went into their bedroom, and I stood right in the middle of their bedroom, and I felt this weird swirl come around me, and it transferred from being this kind of a cold wind feeling to this warm hug. And I had to feel like that was my mom, that was her, you know, our last goodbye kind of thing. And it made me feel better. It made me feel good. So that changed the way I felt in that instant, and maybe even felt a little bit less fear of anyone else dying, you know.
How has your spiritual journey influenced how you create?
I know it sounds stupid and people say this, but I try to find an idea, and sometimes it's easy, you know, that it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time. You know, like the scene in WWJR where we have a church consultant try to sell them on the idea of having the first church of the lotto. You know, I got that from working for a faith-based network called LaCie Broadcasting. And I would see these major pastors come in to do telethons, and they'd be wearing, $50,000 gold Rolex watches and gold chains and rings. And before they would go on TV to ask for money, they would usually take them off and give them to their partner. And then they'd be talking about their Lear jets and stuff. And I was like, golly, come on, guys, let's figure out how you might use that money for other things. And there was one pastor in particular that had 2 jets because he got so many death threats that he had a decoy jet. And I thought, well, okay, if you really believe in God, that God is going to save
matter.
you,
Right.
and when it's your time, it's your time. So there are times when things just come to me. And again, I believe they're gifts. I believe that they're just these, that the God, my spirit, wants to say, knows what I'm trying to do, and they're just given to me. And then I see them like visions. I can watch a whole movie in my head. And when I write, that's what I have to send. Sometimes I have to walk away to rethink that out or to get it. And I'm not gonna lie, I get frustrated when somebody reads it and says, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense," or "This, you should do this," and I'm like, "You don't get it," but for me, that's the creative. And I mean, it can be my comedy. When I write comedy, I just want people to laugh and think about something, because it usually comes from something that I did or somebody else I know did. And for us to see, like, okay, maybe I said that, maybe it's wrong, but hey, forgive me, it's still funny, and if you can look at, even if it's a real thing, you can look at it from a distance or in a different time and think, that was pretty funny. It's really stupid. I shouldn't have felt that way. I shouldn't have had those feelings about this situation, because it's not that big a deal. And death, drama, doing something on purpose to hurt somebody, those are real things. And those are the things that, I don't really write much about, because I think it's because sometimes those are out of a control. Maybe it's a health thing. Maybe it's a mental thing, and by mental I mean it's a psychiatric thing, and maybe it is demons or the devil or something. We don't know.
Do you believe that we all have a purpose, or is it something that we create?
I think we all have a purpose, but when you say that, most people think we have a big purpose. And through my life, I believed I had a big purpose. But as I grew older, I realized that my purpose could be that I gave birth to him, and I didn't give birth, but I gave life. I have helped bring life to him, and I raised him, and he influences somebody else, who influences somebody else, who influences somebody else. It's like when somebody becomes president or they win the Super Bowl. There are a lot of influences in those people's lives, and they're not just them that all of a sudden they become this person that everyone believes in. It's if you find the cure for cancer, it's because you got extra time and didn't have to clean the lab because somebody else does it. And that was their purpose, to help you have the time to figure out how to make this great thing happen. And so many before you that did other things that helped you skip to where you are instead of having to start from the very beginning every time. And so, yes, I think that we all have a purpose. It may not be as fulfilling as maybe everybody wants, and it may not pay the money that maybe other people want, but every purpose, it's like, your nieces and, they have these very unique personalities, And when I watch them, and that's the thing I love about being a dad, when I would watch these guys do stuff and, and then I watch the grandkids do stuff and I realized that even my purpose was to have had their dad to have so they can have them, so maybe they have someone else
Yeah.
and influence someone else in some way.
But
that
you
I've
always
served
called
a
us
purpose.
brats.
Yeah. But I also used to, because I thought Nicholas was going to be president someday.
Oh, yeah.
And when he would walk in the room, I would do the presidential march. Dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
I wanted him to get used to it. And
I was thinking about this topic yesterday because of Ilya Malinin. I might be butchering his name, but he's the male figure skater who he was supposed to win gold. Like, he's really hyped up. And then
US.
For the US. And then he had a really bad skate and fell twice. And anyway, but the way he handled losing, I felt like he could have just won gold and then everyone would have been really excited. But the way he handled losing actually it was way more impactful on everyone, seeing how well he handled it. He went over and shook the guy's hand and gave him a hug. And he was just really like professional in the way and he responded. And I was like, this is a more positive message that we're seeing right now than if he had won, if he had just, kicked ass and won the gold.
Yeah,
so anyway,
how
I just
un-American of him to be a good sport,
But you talk about like purpose. I feel like sometimes your purpose is in something like that, like showing how you can have good sportsmanship and represent the country in that way.
yeah, absolutely. You see it, I think, at the end of a football game where they all go and, hug each other, talk, shake hands, and not all of them. There's some that sit on the bench crying or acting mad, but you can see the real sportsmen go out there and, patting someone on the back for their win or their great job. And, you see it a lot in the worst, I'm not a big fan of it, but in fights, MMA fights, boxing matches, at the end of it, they go hug each other and, most of the time they say that was a great wrestling. You don't see that, they're going to beat him butt and pound him with a chair, but that's part of the, entertainment element of wrestling. And you're right. It's like the other night I was watching the kids and I had to order pizza. And when the pizza guy got there, he was a young guy. And I was asking him if they had put the tip on. And behind me, our granddaughter, your niece, said, "Happy Valentine's Day." And I saw that kid have a smile on his face, and he said it back. And he said, "Don't worry about it." And he walked away, and it was just, for a little kid to reach out and make someone feel good for that instant or moment, it was pretty. And she does that all the time, but there's an innocence to being a child that it looks for the world, I think, that we're talking about, where there's peace and harmony and everything is good and nice. And why does that have to change when we get older,
What sort of advice do you have for other creatives or entrepreneurs who feel disconnected from their inner voice?
I don't feel like anyone really gets disconnected from their inner voice, because I think they know what they want to say. It just doesn't get accepted the way they want it to be accepted. And so many people, I've seen so many people that I thought were far more talented than me gave up, started selling insurance or doing something else, because it was just, the rejection is hard. It's I used to be easily look past the rejection. And as I'm getting older, I'm starting, it hurts a little bit more, because I think of my time of being able to continue to create is running out because people don't listen to somebody in their 70s, not that I'm 70 yet, but, and they get into their 60s and stuff, they start to quit listening to them because you're just an old fart. And, but you just don't give up. You keep trying, and you have to be acceptable to change because everything changes. And in my career, I've seen, in my first radio station I worked at, we played records. And then CDs came along, and DJs would argue that records sounded better than CDs because CDs were before some technology, they were not waveforms because, like music that's recorded on a tape or on a record has kind of a wave to it. And when you look at what's it called, Nickel? When you're looking at the timeline of a music thing, and when it first came out digital, it was like,
right. Yeah, the waveform. Mm-hmm.
And then they were able to, because they played like MP3s that were just, and then they created the waveform that allowed for the instrumentation to sound like it was live. And I never heard a difference, I couldn't tell a difference.
No one can tell it.
Yeah, they say they can, but I never heard it. But I watched people, and then we reached the point to where we were all digital within a hard drive and not even playing CDs anymore. And they all complained then too that the hard drive didn't sound as good as CDs because the bit rate wasn't as high and all these kinds of things. And you have to be able to look at technology and learn it and figure out how do you keep making your voice, how do you create the way you want to create and utilize this technology. And oftentimes for me, it becomes easier. So for me, I always wanted to be an animator. And when I first started doing animation, you still had to know calculus to make some of the things and write code and stuff like that. But today it's there's motion capture and there's all kinds of different things that help that creative process be faster and easier than it was when I first started trying to do it. And you just have to allow yourself to learn how to do that and not look at it as, because a lot of people look at, if it's not hand drawn, then it's not really art. And that's not true. The art comes from how you tell the story more to me than just the drawing. And
what is a book, quote, or teaching that has deeply influenced you?
There was a guy named George Plimpton. He's a writer, and he used to write these books about the experience. So one of the books that I was most fond of was called The Paper Lion. And in that book, at the time when it was written, like in the 70s or something, there wasn't the internet so that people could look up, he didn't play for this team, that he talked the Detroit Lions into letting him come to their spring training camp and try out for the team as a quarterback. And he said he played somewhere when he didn't. And so he got to experience what that was really like, to be a part of that, and then get to know the players as people and not just someone you see on the field. And that really, because that made me think that I have to experience what I want to write to some extent in order to be able to really tell that story. So that really influenced me. Later in life, I watched, this is an older movie too. It's called The Idolmaker. And in The Idolmaker, there's a guy who loves music and wants to create music, and this is based in the 50s. But he knows, in his mind, you can't be a famous musician unless you have this look. And his idea, you can't be blonde, only dark-haired guys with blue eyes and, and a nice body and great voice. And he found this one guy that was a sax player in a band. And when the guy would come out and play, all the girls would, really liked for him to play, and the guys liked him too because they thought he was cool. And he asked this guy to let him train him how to be a big singer that he could make him famous. And he's, nah, you're stupid, man. I'm just going in here to pick up girls, and so he finally convinces him, and he becomes this major pop star because he teaches him how to dance. He teaches him how to sing. He teaches him how to have the persona that he needed to be. And his dad, who wanted to impress, was kind of like he was a little bit of a mobster. He ran the union and where they lived, and so he said, "Look, Pop, look, I'm a success, and he says, you got one, could be lucky. You got 2, 3, then you're a success, So then he finds this kid that just looks good. He's a waiter at his brother's restaurant, and he turns him into a huge pop star. Well, they both end up leaving him to go to a bigger record deal and stuff, and he ends up, depressed and sad and broken. And a woman in his life convinced him that, and even the guys told him, one of the guys told him, "You're the one who's doing this. You should be that yourself." And he's like, "No, I'm balding. I'm not good looking. I'm all these things." But then in the end, he ends up starting to build his career. And so that made me, as a short guy, think that, okay, that there's got to be, I can't be a leading man. I'm not that good looking. And I can't sing. So I had to figure out different ways. So comedy and behind the scenes and all kinds of other different things that I could do to try to build a career out of was what I got from that movie that motivated me to want to keep trying, not give up.
If your soul could speak directly to the audience right now, what would it say?
That's another kind of thing I think that Grandpa has passed on to me. His belief, and I guess the Catholic belief, or what he's read in the Bible, was that our souls are just basically orbs that float around, and we don't converse. We don't. We just we don't know who's who. We're just there. And I guess growing up, and my personal feeling is that it isn't really that. It's funny because we watched a movie last night called Eternity. And in the movie, this old couple, they're probably well in their 80s or almost 90, and they're at a family event, and the husband eats a pretzel too fast, and it gets caught in his throat, and he chokes and dies. And he wakes up on a train, and he's like 35, and he doesn't realize it for a while, but he's dead. And he goes to, and they have I think they called it an AC, but basically a person who tries to help you find out where you're going to spend eternity.
Oh, is this the Pixar movie?
No, it's
okay.
It's a real life movie. I think it was on Apple Plus maybe, and you have to decide which eternity to choose, and you have, a beach eternity, you have Paris eternity, and once you choose, then you're stuck there. And when you get there, you come as the person when you were the absolute happiest. So some are children. They said very few are teens, and then they're all different ages, but it's when you felt the best. And so, like I said, he comes back and he's in his 30s. Well, his wife has terminal cancer, and he's trying to decide on whether he should wait for her. Will she know where to find him? And so the AC, your person, they're trying to push you into somewhere because they got other people they want to do. Now you go, and so he decides to go to the beach because she'll know that's where he went because they were planning a trip to Hawaii when he died, and as he's going, he sees her get off the train and jumps over to go to her, and she's young too, and she comes up to the thing, and she sees him, and they hug, and they start to talk about eternity and blah blah blah, and then another AC agent comes and says, wait, before you make your decision, you need to really think it all out, and he points her and looks at, there's another guy that's probably mid-20s or something, and it's her first husband who died in Korea during the war. And she has to decide who she's going to spend eternity with throughout the rest of the movie, and they're trying to convince her. And so I always kind of thought that heaven was more of a like that but not so stringent, that if I was there and I decided, that I was going to be younger, because that's the way I felt the best, that if I wanted to play baseball, all of a sudden 18 other guys that I knew that liked playing baseball showed up. And not necessarily that was their thing, but it was just, okay, you could be in multiple places at the same time and do those kinds of things. And so what would my spirit say to the audience is that live your best life, because we don't know what the afterlife is. The afterlife could be we're just dead, and that's peace, really, because it's like sleeping. There's, unless you're having a bad dream, there's just there's peaceful, your heart rate's down, everything is just.
Yeah, I recently heard someone compare it to what it was like before you were born, and not any different than that. Like, you were okay then,
right?
Yeah.
I went out with this Baptist woman once that she said, we can't date anymore, we can't. And I said, why? And she said, because you're Catholic, I'm Baptist, we're going to two different heavens. And I was like, what the heck? I don't know. I don't know how many spaces up there, or whatever. And I never heard that. But, I know that there are certain faiths that say that everybody has a mansion and all that kind of stuff. And there's a movie. It was the first movie that Deanne and I went to go see together on a date. It's called The Invention of Lying. Have you ever heard of that? I saw that.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
And it was great because nobody could lie. So that because of that, there couldn't even be a movie or a TV show, because it's really, you're lying. You're pretending to be somebody else, pretending to be in their life, which is a lie. And so all people could do is read history. So any movie was just a guy reading what had already happened because it was history. And nobody could ever lie, but his mother was dying. And she was really scared, and she was in a lot of pain, and he just started making stuff up. Like, he just started saying that, Mom, you're going to go to heaven. And she was like, how do I know you're going to go to heaven? And in heaven, you're going to have a mansion, and you're in heaven's going to have it. And then people started overhearing him, and they started, how do you know? And he started, well, because God told me or something, he just starts coming up with this different things. And obviously, because if you're going to go to heaven and it's that great, people showed up in his backyard and started asking him these questions like, well, what if I kill myself? No, you can't kill yourself. Then you won't go to heaven. Well, what if he kills me? Well, then he can't go to heaven, and so it's like, it's like everybody, I think, has a different idea of what that is. And your spirit, I think, should be telling you to be your best person, live your best life. and love as many people as possible in your life. And if those don't reciprocate that, then they shouldn't be in your universe.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
It's easy to get lost. And even recently, I've had that feeling of, I don't understand why this is happening. How do I fix this? Why aren't you there for me? And that's natural. That's human behavior. So, but again, just like trying to figure out how to be successful is just never give up. Maybe I'm going down the wrong path. Maybe I'm working with the wrong people. Maybe I'm doing things that aren't right because of my association with certain people, and I have to find ways to fulfill that compromise that is my promise, my personal promise to God, and what is intended for me to accomplish.
If people wanted to learn more about your work or reach out to you outside of the podcast, how could they do that?
Several different ways. At fullcreditmedia.com, there's our email address, my email address, stevief@fullcreditmedia, or they can go to beinggrandparents.org, and there's a lot of contact information there.
Awesome.
Well, Dad, it was so cool having you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, you guys have done a great job. I've seen some, pieces of your guests, and it's interesting, and best bunch of your little shorts. They look really good, and it was an honor to be here.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.